What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Tuesday, February 19th, 2019, getting into the week here. And for those of you watching on YouTube, the reason I look so bright and the rest of the room is so dark is because we are under very heavy cloud and rain right now. So it's going to be a wet day. There's just no two ways about it. Anyway, we've got a lot to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, ready to answer the phone, put you on the air with your comments, questions, opinions, prognostications, what have you. All right, we're going to start today's talking points talking about the war zones, the international news, and we're going to start obviously with Venezuela because during his visit to Miami yesterday, President Trump warned Venezuelan military members will lose everything and find no safe harbor anywhere in the world if they continue to defy U.S. expectations, meaning U.S. demands. And he's basically threatening these people. Donald Trump is threatening the military of another country. And some in the administration are arguing Trump was referring to secret Venezuelan military official money stashes worldwide. The reality is that most have little but their future in their lives, and that's what Trump is saying they're going to lose. Reiterating that all options are on the table. I wonder what the Pentagon is going to say about that. I mean, a lot of those senior commanders that are old enough to remember all the mistakes that were made in Vietnam. We don't do well in jungle combat areas, and apparently we don't do well in countries that begin with the letter V. So Venezuela is saying that any breach of the peace will be the fault of the United States and President Donald Trump. And Venezuela is demanding the immediate cessation of all unilateral violent actions against it, which constitute the illegal and criminal blockade of the Venezuelan people, and at the same time declares to the international community that the U.S. chauvinistic government and its president will be responsible for any violation of peace in Venezuela. So Venezuelan authorities are saying basically Trump is trying to give direct orders to the Venezuelan military on rejecting the country's constitution. So far, from what we can tell, not getting a lot of traction. The vast majority of the Venezuelan military are on the side with Maduro. Moscow is now saying that they absolutely will not allow a color revolution in Venezuela. And Russia's foreign ministry has basically made this announcement amid a jostle for power among these rival political factions in Venezuela. Well, it isn't rival political factions. It's Guaido, who just stood up and said, I'm the president, or I'm the interim president. And Donald Trump said, oh, yes, he is. He absolutely is. And then on the other side, you have Maduro and pretty much the rest of the country. This is an attempt at a color revolution. What is really concerning, of course, is that comment Trump made yesterday that all options are open, implying a threat to use the U.S. military for a direct invasion of Venezuela, probably across the Colombian border. And you know, I love they have this in this article. They say, 50 countries have recognized Guaido as the legitimate leader of the country. It's not up to them. It's up to the Venezuelan voters. And last year, the Venezuelan voters voted Maduro back into office in elections that were internationally monitored and declared to be some of the most honest, transparent, and verifiable of any on earth. Apparently, they have a better election system in Venezuela than we have here in this country. All right, let's take a phone call from Joe in California. Aloha, Joe. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Mike, hello. I've heard that the aid plane that arrived yesterday in Colombia, I heard that it also includes those uniquely American voting machines that Venezuela can use in their next election.
Quite probably.
Mike, just want to say, I never thought I would say this, 2 years ago, but Trump is a thug. He is simple thug.
Yep.
He's a failed businessman who was bankrupt 3 times and was bailed out by the Zionists. He is a thug, and I'm already sick of him. And it happens every cycle too. A new president comes in, and I think, okay, maybe we'll see an improvement over the last gang. And they're all criminals. This guy is right up there. He's a thug. When he goes out in front of his base.
I remember back in 2008, Obama was campaigning that he was going to, as soon as he was president, he was going to shut these wars down and bring all the kids home. Never happened.
No, Mike, I think all these elections are psyops. Obama ran on closing Guantanamo, ending the wars, and he didn't do any of those things. But he also, most importantly, is he bailed out the banks. And that basically disarmed the left. Those who probably would have been naturally against that bailout didn't utter a peep because it was done by Obama. Trump comes in. He runs on ending the wars, improving relations with Russia. Nothing. More of the same. I'm very skeptical. I'm very, very suspicious of this Tulsi Gabbard. I really am. I've seen some videos. One that was a very thorough investigation of her. She appeared at this event where the Adelsons were awarded or giving out awards. She's a hawk on the war on terror. Although she is against what we're doing in Syria, but I'm very, very wary of this woman, and I think it's another psyop where they're going to sucker us again into electing someone who's supposedly pro-peace, but once she gets into office, will be pro-war. So I'm very suspicious of her.
Well, again, the question is, do these candidates sincerely want to be anti-war, and once they're in office, are they co-opted? Which certainly seems to have been the case with Donald Trump. Tulsi Gabbard, of all the candidates running on the Democratic side for 2020, she's the only one who's actually served in combat. And so a lot of people think, around here at least, that her anti-war sentiment is genuine. It's the real deal. But again, the question is, how much power does the president really have in this country anymore versus that of the deep state?
Right. And I wouldn't even say, you said co-opted. I don't think Trump was co-opted. I just think he lied. I think he presented himself as something that he wasn't. He was going to improve relations with Russia. He was going to end these wars. I think he was just flat out lying.
I disagree. I think he genuinely thought those would be good ideas, and I think you and I, and probably everybody listening to this show, would agree those are good ideas. But those are not the ideas the deep state wanted to go along with. And now, of course, with this interview by McCabe on 60 Minutes last Sunday, we're seeing just how powerful that deep state is. They literally were trying to stage a coup d'etat against the duly elected president of the United States of America. And if there was ever a time for Trump to get those presidential brass knuckles out, it's now.
Yeah. Mike, before you let me go, just one thing on YouTube. I watch your show live on YouTube, and today I noticed when I just typed in what really happened, like I always do, your show didn't come up. These other unrelated videos came up.
Okay, imagine my shock on that one.
I don't know if they're doing something. And then also, when I'm watching, and this has been happening for the past few weeks, there's a lot of interrupting and skipping, where it'll jump ahead. It seems like, I don't know, something's being done.
Yeah, I'm either going to switch on over to another video streaming service, or I'm just going to stop having a video adjunct, because there aren't that many people who watch the show through YouTube anyway.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Mike.
All right. Thank you. Plus I'm getting older and I don't look that good on camera anymore. We're going to do a shout out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our show, and we're going to go back to the phones. Steve Elkins, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, Michael, I was watching on C-SPAN last week, and I was trying to figure out, they were basically interrogating the acting Attorney General, Matthew Whitaker. 1 week left on his job, and of course we know William Barr was confirmed as now the Attorney General. I was trying to figure out why so late in the game did they bring this guy up and want to question him, interrogate him? Who are you? How'd you get this job? When he had 1 week left, I was thinking there must be some kind of diversion plan. They want to get our mind off of something else is why they did this, because it didn't make any sense 1 week left on the job to bring this guy up and interrogate him. What do you think?
Yeah, well, we're seeing a lot of distractions all over the place, and this Jesse Smollett case reeks of Gary Condit back in the run-up to 9/11. And of course, the corporate media is not doing any reporting at all on what's going on in Syria or Venezuela or Libya or any of the war zones. It's like the wars have all but vanished. And now, obviously, the media did carry Trump's speech from Miami, talking tough about Venezuela, but they're not covering any of the other ancillary, the real factual news. All we're getting is the propaganda.
Yeah. I did see that Russia upstaged the United States as far as humanitarian aid versus 100 tons the United States is sending, and I guess Russia is sending 300 tons. So I guess the knight in shining armor of the United States isn't looking so good right now. It was a little tarnished.
Well, it was a very smart thing for them to do because, of course, the United States is demanding that Venezuela allow their aid trucks to cross the border from Colombia, and Maduro is saying no because he's convinced those aid trucks include weapons for paramilitary groups. But by allowing Russia to deliver this 300 tons of humanitarian aid, then he's basically pulled the rug out from under the claim by the White House that the evil Maduro is starving his people deliberately by not letting the humanitarian aid in. Maduro is allowing something like 900 tons of humanitarian aid in. He's just not allowing the American aid in because he sees a Trojan horse. Or a trumpet horse.
I agree. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
All right, thanks an awful lot. The phone lines are open. And I was just about to get that. There is humanitarian aid going into Venezuela from many of their allies, 300 tons from Russia alone. And so, Maduro is allowing humanitarian aid into Venezuela. He just doesn't want to let the American humanitarian aid into Venezuela because he's suspicious. I mean, you've got the U.S. government on one hand has been fighting economic war against Venezuela for decades. They've hit it with all these crushing sanctions to destroy the economy and starve the people, and then they turn around and say, ooh, let us bring in these trucks. It's got food, and it's got candy, and it's all free today, children. So, anyway. The Venezuelan ambassador to Russia commented on the situation in South America, saying that Juan Guaido is a puppet of the United States and was recruited by the Central Intelligence Agency 10 years ago. Ooh, gee, what a shock here. The diplomat also said that he thinks that military intervention could follow the U.S.'s aid. And Venezuela says they're expecting provocations from the opposition. Yeah, that's generally the way this seems to be going. Now, here's what's really interesting. As you know, one of the big deals that Washington, D.C. is making is how many countries have leapt on board recognizing Juan Guaido as the legitimate ruler of Venezuela, including neighbors right there in the Caribbean area, Haiti and Dominican and Republic. And you have to wonder what's going on there, because for the last decade, Venezuela has aided the governments of Haiti and the Dominican Republic through a preferential system known as PetroCaribe, which provided subsidized crude oil prices to meet the country's energy demands. They're all friends. Maduro has been doing all these wonderful things. And then all of a sudden, they switch around and say, oh yeah, Maduro out, Guaido in. And you have to wonder what pressure was brought to bear by the United States on Haiti and the Dominican Republic, because it doesn't make sense. They genuinely felt that way. Okay? All right, we're going to grab a call from HG in Tennessee. Aloha, HG. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? HG, are you there? HG going once, going twice. Okay, hello? I'm going to go back to the news here and maybe HG.
Hello.
Hello, are you there?
I heard a bunch of squealing and stuff going on. A little radio trouble there, huh?
I'm not sure why, but anyway, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, good show today, Mike. I was sitting here listening when we're doing Venezuela, and it's just like we're getting hit with so much stuff every day, something new, you know. Everything just seems old, and nobody's, I mean, you talk about Yemen, and that's where I've learned, you know, what's really going on over there, but that's just, how can we let Yemen go on? It's just ridiculous. But my big deal is if we don't get a hold of, if we can't put good news out to the public, there's too much public that's not aware of anything that's going on.
Well, I disagree with that. We know that the corporate media is in decline, despite having all the glitz and the glamour and the lights and the hot babes. They're losing their audience, and they're losing ad revenues, and they're running deeply in the red. There have been massive layoffs in the corporate media over this last year, and people are now taking it upon themselves to find out what's going on by going to the web and using search engines, and they know to avoid certain search engines like Google, which is clearly filtering things now, and we're literally in a cyber war between those of us who think the American people need to have all the facts and be fully informed so they can make good choices, and those on the other side who are seeking to basically submerge us into a real-world version of the Matrix where everything that we see is a lie that convinces us to do what the government wants us to do.
Gotcha. What about the NDAA? Why can't he executive order that out of existence? And because it's got a provision in there that it's okay to lie and propagandize us.
Yeah, that's so, well, I mean, the government has always been lying to us and propagandizing us. You know, they just got rid of the laws that said that was a bad thing to do. So it didn't really change the facts on the ground. If anything, I mean, the government is now admitting, yeah, we're lying to you, but if you're a patriotic American, you will believe the bovine excrement, and you will give us your money and your children for all of these wars.
I'm over it.
Okay?
I said I'm over it. I'll let you go.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. Another phone call. Terry in California. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Fact that if I'm correct, I'm finding this out just on my own now, that the U.S. started this problem down in Venezuela itself. In other words, if the U.S. didn't intervene in markets, they would be, Venezuela would continue on as they were before as a prosperous country.
Yes.
In other words, the U.S. got in and intervened in the oil market to drive the price down, you know, by increasing production by OPEC, by Saudi Arabia, and the drilling in the United States and some other ways too, and also manipulating the markets. Well, what's your take on all that?
Oh, absolutely. And it wasn't just Venezuela. I mean, you go back, you know, through the 60s and 70s, the United States was meddling about all over South America to basically get them under U.S. economic control. And they weaponized the banking system where, you know, for example, Venezuela would take out loans from American banks, and then the U.S. government would drive down oil prices so Venezuela couldn't make the payments on those loans. And then the U.S. would use that debt to exert control over Venezuela and its people. And they have done this to pretty much every country in South America, which is why South America does not like North America.
Yeah, and I don't think he's going to get the army to come over because I think they're getting educated on what the problem was in the beginning.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, the U.S. intervening.
Absolutely. Anyway, listen, Terry, got to let you go. Got to take a break for commercials.
Okay.
We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to go back to the phones to Art off the grid. Aloha, Art. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. I kind of wanted to run something by you, get your thoughts on this. I was reading an article this morning on Yahoo News, and it was talking, apparently Trent Lott had given an interview to Yahoo News,
And he was making the comment, trying to make the argument that there was really only one Democrat that actually could pose any kind of real challenge to Donald Trump in the 2020 campaign, and that individual, he said, would be Joe Biden. Mm-hmm. And he used the reasoning that Biden would be able to pull off this kind of Uncle Joe persona, if you will, because he's such a pleasant guy and he's so well qualified, you know. But he goes on to talk about, you know, the majority of people in Congress right now are not qualified. I mean, this coming from Trent Lott, most of the people in Congress are not qualified.
Yes,
this says a lot for his endorsement, if you want to call this an endorsement of Joe Biden. But then he went on to say, and this is what really got me, was after he made the statement about, you know, Trump is more qualified than he was 3 years ago. But he goes on and he makes a comment that they remind us in the article that in 2002, at a birthday party for Strom Thurmond, he made the statement that had Strom Thurmond been elected in 1948, we wouldn't have had all of the problems that we've had up to this point. And we got to keep in mind that, remember, Strom Thurmond his whole presidential campaign was based upon resisting desegregating the U.S. military. So we add all this up together, and we kind of have to wonder, you know, is Joe Biden really, I mean, if we got somebody like Trent Lott who thinks this way about Strom Thurmond, is Joe Biden really the best guy we got on the Democrat side?
Well, maybe not, because, you know, Bernie Sanders has stepped in. He's declared for 2020.
I heard Bernie's little real quickie 5-minute whatever this morning, and I was like, oh, no, here we go.
Well, you know, I mean, if the DNC had not rigged the primaries, Bernie Sanders would have been the Democrats' candidate in 2016. He probably still would have lost to Donald Trump. But if it were in 2020, if it's Bernie Sanders versus Donald Trump, Sanders could easily take it, because, you know, Trump is just abusing his base. He's turned his back on a lot of his support, and I'm agreeing with all those people who are saying Trump is going to be a one-term president.
Yeah, I'm at that point now myself. And that, you know, talking about Bernie Sanders, you brought that up. I remember right after Trump's last State of the Union speech, after Stacey Abrams, who thankfully lost the run for governorship here in Georgia, and she lost by what they call a very narrow margin to our current governor, and you know, but either way, I'm glad she lost, because she's straight up socialist, anti-Second Amendment, all of that. But right after her little response to Trump's State of the Union, Bernie Sanders came out with his, and I remember calling into a couple different RBN broadcasts and mentioning that what I heard both from Stacey Abrams and from Bernie Sanders, I heard campaign speeches, primary campaign speeches. I didn't hear a response to the State of the Union. What I heard was campaign speeches. Yeah. So now that we know that Sanders is officially throwing his hat in the ring for the primaries, I think we're in for a very entertaining show over the next couple of years, I think. Well, anyway, thanks, Mike.
All right, thanks an awful lot. I mean, the Democratic candidates are going to have to show up to the convention in one of those clown cars from the circus, little tiny car, like 20 people pile out of it. Okay, the phone lines are open again. We're going to get back to the news. We're talking about what events all over the Caribbean here. And even as Trump is trying to inspire a military coup against the elected president of Venezuela, there is evidence surfacing that the U.S. government is enabling American mercenaries to crush the popular uprising that's going on in Haiti. Now, Haiti is currently ruled by a U.S.-backed puppet regime. It's incredibly corrupt. You remember all these horror stories that came on out following, especially the earthquake, where all this money was collected for the benefit of the people of Haiti. The people of Haiti didn't get it. It went to corporations. It went to politicians. It went to the Clinton Foundation. And it's just reached a point where the people of Haiti want a new government. So apparently Haitian authorities arrested Americans transporting a cache of weapons 5 Americans and 3 others were arrested Sunday in Haiti. And yeah, it looks like the U.S. is sending in mercenaries to try and start shooting the Haitian protesters to try and quell the protests. I don't think it's going to work. Look how much damage the French police have inflicted on the yellow vests, and they're still out there. Anyway, we got to take another break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And we're going to go right back to the phones to Jeff in St. Paul. Aloha, Jeff. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, just in the last 30 minutes, your show has been knocked off YouTube. I've got like the blank screen, like your video has been pulled. So I've had to go back to your webpage and hit the link, and it starts up again. But that's 4 times in 30 minutes.
All right. Well, then I got to find a new video streaming service here, because YouTube is obviously going the way of the other corporate social media.
This is like remember, Leave It to Beaver, Eddie Haskell. You're getting the business.
Yep.
Thanks, buddy.
All right, thanks an awful lot here. We're going to switch over to Billy in Pennsylvania. Aloha, Billy. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, just referring, I catch your show the day before on YouTube. I don't get it to watch it on the day of, but I had no idea there were that many coups. America has pulled on South America and going all the way up to Saddam Hussein. I mean, thank you for all your information. That just blew me away. I knew there were, a lot of things going on, but I had no idea it was that much.
Yeah, it's been an ongoing thing. And, again, starting at the end of World War II and running up to, only about maybe 10 years ago, all of these coups were kept secret from the American people. Well, today, it's like the U.S. government isn't even trying to hide anymore what they're doing, especially with Donald Trump's speech. There's, their attitude is, we're going to overthrow these countries, and, we're going to feed the American people the usual bovine excrement about how we're bringing them democracy, and the current elected leader is a horrible, evil tyrant, dictator, and, he's ruined his country. And again, the economic devastation of Venezuela was engineered from outside.
Yeah, and it's like, put the liberals and the Republicans or whatever aside, it's a group of criminals literally running the government. I mean, that's like you're overthrowing over other countries. I mean, that's crazy.
Well, every society has criminals, and the dumb ones go to prison and the smart ones go into the government.
Can I ask your opinion on one more thing? Because I know you got other callers and all. I was really thinking hard about the wall thing, and what is your opinion on Donald Trump taking 2 years to act on this when we had the House and the Senate full of Republicans for 2 years, where that really should have been one of the first things that he'd done, because this has really disappointed me.
Yeah,
this
it is disappointing.
I just feel like I'm being played like a fiddle,
Well, there are a couple of different factors. First of all, let's acknowledge the fact that Donald Trump, during those first 2 years, was dealing with all of these attacks coming from outside and all these investigations and all this Russia collusion nonsense. He was having to deal with that. The other aspect, though, is apparently Trump is not, shall we say, doesn't have the best work ethic for a president, because we're hearing that he only works half days. And the rest is, quote, executive time, end quote. So he just put it on hold, and he may have actually truthfully thought the GOP was going to hang on to control of the House of Representatives, and he could get it done in the second half of his term in office, just in time for the 2020 election.
Yeah, 'cause part of me is thinking, the people that he probably answers to, and I don't want to get into all the conspiracy theory things, but if there is a higher power beyond the deep state that he has to answer to, like what you were saying before. Maybe they took him aside and showed him the Zapruder film or something. Maybe they made him wait, and then I don't know. It's just so crazy. I don't know who to believe anymore. It's just crazy.
Well, what we're hearing
The
from
whole
inside
thing is
the
just
White
crazy.
House, what we're hearing from inside the White House is that Trump, unfortunately, is easy to manipulate. He's very susceptible to flattery. He's got a huge, huge ego, which is something you find among billionaires. And if you feed that ego, you can basically move the guy around. So,
Wow.
that's kind of where we
crazy.
are.
Well, thank you for everything that you do, and God bless you, man. You're just a really a great source of information. So thank you for everything, and I'll let you go and have a great show.
All right, thanks an awful lot, and we're going to take another phone call from Joe in Tennessee. Aloha, Joe. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, I just want to make a quick comment to the previous caller that, Trump had Rhino Chamber of Commerce Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan, and probably 50% of the congressmen that Republicans don't want immigration reform and don't want a wall. That's why he wasn't able to do it in 2 years with the Republicans in the control of the House and Senate. Now, the dirty little secret is most Republicans are rhinos, and they're all about big business, and that's why you didn't get your wall. And he'll probably basically have to wait 2 years to another election and get Trump Republicans in there and make the wall an issue before they'll be able to finish the wall. But what I'm calling you about is...
Before we move on, you do raise a valid point that even with both houses of Congress under GOP control, it was not a solid majority to support the building of the wall. And a lot of it has to do with this, I think, misguided notion that flooding this country with a bunch of illegal immigrants is going to be good for the economy because it's going to drive down wages and salaries. Well, it's going to be good for the corporations, but not for the economy as a whole, because the costs associated with all these illegal immigrants, most of whom are living on some form of public assistance at taxpayer expense here. In fact, it's starting to look like these illegal immigrants are kind of like sperm. Millions come in, but only one actually works.
That's pretty funny. And I totally agree with you. If they would do something about the welfare system and the social safety net, and I wouldn't be so against immigrants, and it's also about them illegally voting, I wouldn't be as anti-immigrant as I am. I'm more anti-immigrant because they come in here and get a free ride, and you're getting all these Somalians and stuff that come in here and they don't assimilate, and then they just get on the dole, and that's my problem with it. But what I wanted to call about initially was about the hate crime. And what I don't understand is, like, if somebody paints a swastika on a building, it's a hate crime. But then if it turns out that the guy that did it is Jewish, he's not charged with a hate crime. And this black guy there, he goes and he puts a noose around his neck, and that's a hate crime. Be it against himself, and I hear they're going to charge him with fraud. Well, that's fine, but he should also be charged with a hate crime because it's ethnic intimidation for everybody else. So what I don't understand is, a hate crime is supposed to be, ethnically intimidating people based on their race or their religion. And why is it, if you do it to yourself or if it's a fraud, why aren't you charged? Only white people get charged with hate crimes? Is that it? White Christians?
Well, I think the argument could be made, and I actually agree with you. Let me start off by saying that. I think the argument could be made that once the hate crime hoax is exposed as a hoax, then the intimidation factor goes away.
Well, look, if putting a swastika on a building is considered a hate crime, then whether the person that did it is Jewish or Christian or from the Mars shouldn't matter. I mean, that's what bothers me about this. It's just not constitutionally proper to do that because everybody's supposed to be treated equally. So if you commit a crime which is doing something like that, how can it not be a crime for some group of people and yet be a crime for others? And literally, they really throw the book at you. I mean, it's a federal crime to be some of these hate crimes. You'll get federal time, and and a lot more years than you normally would believe, and not in a good fancy prison like they send the rich dudes to. And meanwhile, if it turns out that you're of the privileged class, it's nothing. They'll get you for filing a false police report, and it's wrong.
No, you raise a very, very good point, and I think the idea of staging an attack against yourself is in kind of a little gray area, but I am in agreement with you that if somebody paints a swastika on the wall of a synagogue and it's declared a hate crime, it doesn't matter who did it, even if it was the rabbi, and they should be charged. For one thing, we've got to stop all these hoaxes. I mean, if you look at that list of hoaxes that we put up on the website yesterday, it just goes on and on and on with all these hate crime hoaxes. And right now, of course, the liberals are trying to defend Smollett because they don't want the American people to get the idea that maybe the vast majority of these hate crimes are hoaxes, even though that seems to be what's developing.
Yeah, I mean, this guy wanted it on camera. It could have created a huge problem in Chicago. There could have been riots. People could have gotten killed. And then it turns out that it was all a fraud. They can't just let this guy get away with, some false police report. They have to really pile the charges on this guy.
Well,
we got to, because this is like America's almost a tinderbox. It's not going to take much with all the, the politicization of race to left, right, and Trump and whatever. There, it's something like this could really be a spark, and it has to be nipped now, in the bud.
I agree. I absolutely agree. And, this guy could go away for like 3 years. And the irony of all of this is the early story was that he did this to generate publicity because he thought he was being written out of the show, Empire. Now we're hearing from the show's writers, no, there were no plans to write him out of the show. But obviously, when he gets sent to prison, they're going to have to basically take him out of the program. So talk about a classic case of hoisting with one's own petard.
Well, and the other thing is I hear people saying, oh, well, we had no idea. What a fraud. I'm telling you, 80% of the lefties on TV knew it was a fraud from the beginning. They go along with it. They get it all out there. The message is out there, and then the retraction means nothing. It's like 2 minutes. So the propaganda is propelled for a week, and then they know it. They know it was baloney. Anybody could say, I knew it was baloney from the minute I heard it. And then they're, oh, woe is me, we got taken. They knew all along it was a fraud. And then they propel the propaganda into the mainstream consciousness. And then when it comes out that it's a fraud, it gets little or no attention at all.
The media has always operated that way. When the propaganda is put on out there, it's banner headlines, nonstop coverage. When it all falls apart and it turns out it was a hoax, it gets a half column inch on the last page of the newspaper underneath the obituaries. They've always played the game that way. The retractions are always very small.
So I'm sitting here in Tennessee, a white guy, and it's okay for them through fraud to demonize me and, white Christians and MAGA wearing hat guys. That's okay. There's no apology. It's okay to do that. And the media enjoys doing that. They're just like those kids with Covington. They love that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, everybody, for 2 weeks, it's like they have an orgy of demonization against people like us.
Yes.
And it's very sick. It's very sick. It's sickness.
It's very alarming, because there's clearly we're seeing the government and the corporate media and the political system as a whole openly tolerant of the rise of an anti-white sentiment in this country. And we should be alarmed, especially after what we saw in South Africa and Zimbabwe, because
it's a shame, but let's hope people wake up. I'm really hoping that like a lot of black people and stuff can rise up and say enough of this also, because they know they've been on the downside of that demonization and racism.
No, unfortunately, history has shown that when you have an oppressed people who are suddenly freed from that oppression, they tend to become oppressors themselves.
Well, I hope not, but we'll see. We'll see what happens. It's gonna, I just hope everybody takes a step back from this because, like I said, I can't believe these people on TV saying, "Oh, we had no idea. What a fraud." Come on! From the minute it happened, it was so obvious that it was a fraud.
Yeah.
And then they just want these kind of things so they can demonize people. It's like we're living with the kulaks in the Soviet Union. We're the kulaks. Look what the kulaks did.
All right. Well, Joe, listen, we're short on time. We've got callers on the line. We're coming up on a commercial break, so we're going to let you go here and switch to Jim in Michigan. Aloha, Jim. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, Mike, there's something that has not been covered by the news, and it's such an amazing story. And I understand that we have been thinking about sending all the Democrats to Mexico, and now they're starting to think about building a wall. Anywho, and I was just wondering, whenever a white guy, does something that's minuscule next to what this Empire actor did, they lose their jobs. I'm wondering if he's going to lose his job on Empire, just to be fair. But you know what? I probably pretty much know the answer on that. It's they're not going to let him go because the only people that can be racist are white.
Yeah, that's actually an attitude that we're seeing through the pop culture. Is that white people not only is it that only white people can be racist? It's that white people are automatically racist no matter what they say. I mean, that's literally the propaganda that's going on out there, and it's utterly ridiculous. But it's being promoted, it's being indoctrinated, it's being encouraged, and there's obviously an agenda behind it to permanently alter the demographics of this country, and basically turn the United States into just another part of the third world. And I grieve for that. Because I'm old enough to remember this country from when it really was a great nation with good infrastructure and good technology and great manufacturing and bountiful agriculture and a really good society. And all of that is just melting away right now.
Well, I have family all over Michigan, and I can tell you absolutely, Michael, that I don't see any racism at all. I mean, we interact with people of color all the time, and there's no racism. This is all contrived by the major media.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree.
So, anyways,
all right. Well, listen.
Hope that people don't find it.
Yeah, I'm going to have to let you go now. We got to take another break for commercials. We'll be right back. Hey, aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, and we are going to be talking about Jussie Smollett a little bit further in the show. And there's a little bit more information about him yet to come on out. Returning to the war zones around the world, let us turn to Syria. And in the process of securing the liberated areas in Damascus and the countryside, the Syrian Arab army keeps finding all of these underground warehouses in which there are huge quantities of weapons and ammunition made by the United States and Israel. So apparently they found ammunition, shells, medium and light weapons hidden in these underground warehouses. So you know who was backing all of these so-called terror groups? Now the commissioner of the International Human Rights Commission in the Middle East, Haitham Abu Said, is saying right now the United States is smuggling and transporting terrorists from the Raqqa countryside and other areas in northern Syria to countries in Africa in collaboration with the Turkish regime's army. So we're now getting ready to seriously mess up Africa. Okay, the other day, Trump came on out and demanded that Europe take back, I think it's something like 800 ISIS prisoners being held in Syria, or that the U.S. was simply going to release them and let them percolate back to Europe on their own and do whatever ISIS fighters are going to do when they go to Europe. And he's already been turned down by 2 countries, and France became the third today. saying absolutely not. We are not going to welcome these people back inside our country. And French Justice Minister Nicole Belloubet said this is a new geopolitical context with the U.S. withdrawal. For the time being, we are not changing our policy. Now, at this point, if the United States is really getting ready to start messing around in Africa, not to mention Venezuela, and given that ISIS was supported for a very long time by the United States, I have a feeling that what's really going to happen is they're going to try and recruit those 800 ISIS prisoners and say, we're going to let you get out of jail. And in exchange, you're going to go to this African or South American country and just go back to doing what you were doing before. And I think most of them will probably just go along with that here. Getting on over to the newest flashpoint on Earth, India is weighing a military strike in Kashmir after the deadliest terror attack in 30 years. And you can see right there the disconnect. This was a terror attack. This was not an attack by Pakistan. Pakistan is denying having anything to do with this. For all we know, it may have been done by the Kashmiri themselves, who are sick and tired of being fought over all these years. But in India's point of view, oh yeah, we're going to blame Pakistan and we're getting ready to do military strikes in Kashmir. The real agenda here is that India has been losing ground in Kashmir for years. And now they want an excuse to take it all back in a single lump. We're going to take a break, back with hour 2 after these few words. Aloha America, welcome back to our show. Hour number 2, the phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. The Indian government apparently is becoming concerned that militants and refugees are going to be crossing the border with Myanmar. And so they are deploying additional army units along there as well. So India now has effectively a two-front war, Kashmir and Myanmar. And it's kind of unusual because one does not really think of India in the modern age as being a military aggressor. Certainly in historical times they were. All right, turning on over to Ukraine. They're coming up on elections, and it's looking like Poroshenko is not going to be the next president. And the 3 leading candidates right now is an oligarch. He's an incumbent oligarch, anti-Russia hardliner. And then you have this gas princess, comes from an oil and gas family. She's sort of the femme fatale of Kiev's political scene. And then there's this comedian who's best known for playing a fictional president in a popular TV drama. His name is Zelensky, and as of right now, he is leading in the polls. There's an old story that was floating around. Did you know in the Kingdom of Tripoli, they would actually elect their kings, which is not that unusual. Hawaii's last 2 kings were elected to that office as well. And there was this one king of Tripoli, his name, I think, if I recall, was Osman. And he was a coffee merchant. And diplomats from other countries are saying, why did you vote this guy in? And they said, he makes a good cup of coffee. That's more than most kings can do. Okay. Poroshenko was up in Munich promising to keep bombarding Donetsk in response to Russian aggression. He's still trying to push that canard, if you will. And again, Russia is not aggressing. It's the West. They broke that promise they made at the breakup of the Soviet Union to keep NATO basically at that eastern border of Germany, and yet bit by bit by bit, they're marching closer toward Russia. You can look at a map over time and see who the aggressors are here. And Poroshenko was out there saying that Ukraine does not intend to stop shelling the republics of Donbass because if Kiev ceases firing, the Ukrainian state will cease to exist. If Russia stops shooting, there will be peace. Russia isn't shooting. It's the people of Donbass. Man, the propaganda is pathetically transparent here. Even more alarming, the deputy director of the Ukrainian Institute of World Politics, Belaskov, was at a press conference in Kiev saying the Ukrainian fleet needed missile systems to deliver ground strikes, as Russia has saturated the Crimea with equipment. So looking past the immediate lines, what we're hearing is, yes, there is in fact a plan to militarily take Crimea away from Russia and glue it back on to Ukraine. So that's going to get a little bit dicey. Now, Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said that the European project, by which he means the EU, has failed to provide security and prosperity for the continent. And the EU is wasting all of its energies to confront Russia just to please Washington, D.C. And Lavrov said a unified Europe has not yet been built. Everyday issues from eradicating terrorism to steady economic growth have not been addressed with adequate solutions. Instead, Europe has enjoyed being a follower of Washington's lead while pursuing a NATO-centered foreign policy. Great Britain has announced they're going to strengthen their military presence up in the Arctic to oppose Russia. We have to go up there and, protect the polar bears from the Russian bears. So apparently more than 1,000 British Navy Marines will conduct annual training with Norwegian colleagues as part of a 10-year program, forming a new detachment in the near future. And the British minister said the UK will send to the Arctic region next year a Poseidon P-8 maritime patrol plane to monitor the growing activity of Russian submarines. So, hey, we're all going to fight over the North Pole now. Just please remember, Santa Claus is a non-combatant. That red suit doesn't mean anything. It's not his political affiliation. It's just to make him visible. All right, we're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now coming on back to our program. Over in France, President Macron visited a Jewish ceremony on which swastikas were drawn on nearly 100 graves, supposedly by neo-Nazis. And actually, this was up in Germany. And it's in Quatzenheim in the Alsace region near Germany. And this was just before nationwide rallies to denounce a surge in anti-Jewish hate crimes. Ooh, look at the coincidence timing. Macron said, we shall act, we shall pass laws, we shall punish. I mean, this reeks of being another hate crime hoax to support the political agenda. And they're happening all over the place. Apparently, over in Missoula's University District, people are putting flyers on cars that are described as anti-Semitics. And they all feature the President Donald Trump with the flag of Israel and say Jews attack First Amendment, which actually is true. But I don't think anti-Semites are doing this. I think these are Jewish activists. It smells like another hoax to me. And I think it was only yesterday that I said, given how Israel appears to be getting ready to try and grab the Golan and invade Lebanon yet again, that we should expect to see a rash of these hate crime hoaxes in the coming weeks, so that Israel can say, oh, we're the victims, feel sorry for us and join us in our fight against those who hate us. I mean, how many more times are you going to have to be tricked before you understand that's what's going on here? Now, Ilhan Omar is still drawing a lot of flack for her comments about AIPAC, which were denounced as anti-Semitic. And it's really kind of absurd here, because just stop and think for a minute. What she actually said was that a lobbying group, that's what we're talking about, a lobbying group, was trying to influence the Congress in their favor, which is what every lobbying group does. Now, let's say for a minute there's a lobbying group that wants to protect the U.S. government subsidies for farmers. And they're trying to influence the Congress. And if Ilhan Omar had denounced that, would she have been accused of hating all the farmers in America? So you can see how silly this is. Anyway, Omar was accused of anti-Semitism, immediately by Republicans, afterwards by members of her own party. She was bullied into apologizing. And she may or may not be prejudiced against Jews, but that wasn't her offense. Her offense, if you want, was to mention the irrefutable fact that many members of Congress take money and marching orders from a foreign powers lobbying apparatus, which for some mysterious reason, as required by law, has not yet registered under the Foreign Agents Registration Act. That's the reality. I mean, if you look at the fury with which so many members of Congress attacked Omar, that tells you right there, there's something they're hiding they don't want their constituents to know about. And looking at that hysteria, that hysterical reaction by Congress, basically proved her main point. AIPAC has power over members of Congress, and it is awesome, not in a good way. So, anyway. Over in Gibraltar, actually, we have a caller on the line. Tom in Connecticut. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
It strikes me as odd when you hear these plans for 70 and 90% tax rates, regardless of historical reference, that they never explain how to get rid of waste and fraud, how they're going to account for all this new money that will pour in. And with headlines saying, gee, they've collected historically the largest amount of tax revenues ever. And then the next headline says we're running the highest deficits ever.
Yeah, they contradict each other. They, obviously, we know the deficit is real. So the claim that they're collecting record tax revenues, I think, is meant to reassure the government's creditors that everything is still okay. Don't hit the panic button. Don't start calling in the loans. Because it really doesn't make sense. With wages and salaries for the American people in decline, with corporate earnings down, and especially with the GOP's tax cuts this last year, it just doesn't make sense to claim that tax revenues are up.
Okay, it's just, then you have people like Catherine Austin Fitts who are pointing out these new, I think it's ASB 56 or something. I mean, on the heels of the Pentagon failing its audit, which they knew it was going to happen anyway, and basically admitting that there's no way to really keep track of any of this. And then this legislation evidently says they can make numbers up and they don't have to be accountable for anything. So it's like this giant black hole of, great, take all the billionaires' money, take, 90% over, let them keep $200 million. Where's that going to go? What, everybody's going to get $10? I don't know.
It's going to go to make interest payments on the national debt, but I'm going to tell you right now, it's never going to happen. I mean, it sounds good when, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez comes on out and says, yes, we want to tax the ultra billionaires, but those billionaires have got as much of a lock on Congress as Israel does. They're not going to let it happen.
How can they lock on Congress? How can the headline I think this morning was Amazon pays no taxes on $11 billion in revenues or some friggin' thing?
Yes.
And nobody, these. I mean, she's kind of attractive in her own way, but she gets out there and gets press time because of that. But these things that come out of her mouth are staggering. Although, when she sat in front of whatever congressional committee that was, and laid out that scenario about I can do this and I can do that and I can do this and nothing will happen to me. Are you familiar with that clip?
Yeah.
That was pretty extraordinary, really. To see these guys' faces kind of like blanch and be at a loss for words and basically say like, oh, yeah, you can do that. It's just staggering, the dysfunction of all this stuff. It's just staggering. So I'll leave it at that for today, and thank you so much. Take care.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. Now, one of the wrinkles in the Brexit arrangement is the relationship between Britain and Spain regarding Gibraltar, which holds that very commanding position at the mouth of the Mediterranean. And Spain sort of kicked things into gear by sending a warship into what Spain claims is Spanish territorial waters around Gibraltar, and ordered 3 commercial ships to basically move because they were breaking maritime security law in the Spanish territorial waters by standing still. Apparently they dropped anchor and they were just waiting there. We see that a lot off the coast here in Hawaii as well. But Spain is trying to make a point that if Britain leaves the European Union, that Spain expects Britain to leave Gibraltar as well. And I'm not sure that Britain is going to want to do that. For one thing, that rock has been tunneled into, and there are all kinds of facilities in there, storage vaults, radio stations, radar stations. Britain's not going to want to walk away from that. All right, France has gathered for the 14th week of the Yellow Vest protests, the injury toll of the worst civil unrest in decades, now resembling that of a small war. And yet, Emmanuel Macron, despite global condemnation, is escalating the pressure. Now, Fiorina Jacob Linier, who lost an eye at a demonstration on December 8th, saying, "This is not normal. We are in France, one of the oldest and best democracies in the world. We usually condemn from afar other countries where this occurs, but that this is happening here is unbelievable." So apparently there was this boyfriend, Jacob Maxim, told Russia Today they were marching with a column of peaceful demonstrators when a group of masked radicals began to vandalize a shop front from more than 50 yards away. Now, I'm going to tell you right now, that group of masked vandals are agent provocateurs. They're actually working for the French government to cause trouble so the media can demonize the Yellow Vests. We had that story the other day where supposedly a leader of the Yellow Vests, which is for the most part a leaderless movement, came on out and said that there is now a Yellow Vest militia ready to bring down the government. I think that was another hoax as well. All right, let's take another phone call. Scott in Dallas, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, I just want to talk about the rule of law and how it's officially dead. And I don't know if you heard about American intelligence media probably about 4 weeks ago now. They were looking into how come none of these people are held accountable for, say, like perjury or anything.
Yeah.
So started to go back, really dig into the law, and everybody needs to go look at 18 U.S.C. 1001 Statements and Entry. Section A sits there and talks about any documents, oral or written, that you put before a judge or a magistrate that could be held for perjury.
Yes.
Section B says anything that is submitted, oral or written, before a judge or magistrate, you are not held liable for. Totally contradicting what Section A just said, and it has been upheld in appellate court decision. That is why nobody is held accountable for anything anymore. It was put in the law in 1986. The rule of law is dead. So that's all I got.
Well, I think the rule of law is very much alive for us serfs, but we've become a two-tiered society. The law is for the little people, for the serfs. The nobility are above the law. In fact, there's an interesting little historical story about Ursabet Bathory, who was a real-life, what can I say? She was a monster. And she's actually the prototype on which the myth of the female vampire queen was built. And she was basically just murdering young girls from the villages on her property. but she couldn't be touched because under the laws of the time, she was nobility. No, you can't punish them. They literally had to change the laws of the kingdom in order to finally bring it to a stop, and they walled her up in her castle.
Well,
anyway, Scott, thanks for the call. We're going to let you go here. Ultimately, there will be accountability, as Bathory herself demonstrated here. There is a big fight winding up between Congress and the White House on Yemen. Now, a lot of people, the optics on Yemen have gotten so bad, U.S. involvement with this, even though the U.S. is trying to say this is Saudi Arabia's idea, nobody's buying that anymore. The U.S. is providing weapons, aerial refueling, satellite intelligence, and it's very obvious this is another U.S. operation. And the reason is simple. Several years ago, the United States carried out a successful regime change operation in Yemen. Then the people of Yemen kicked out the U.S. puppet ruler, and this is the U.S. trying to go back in and say, no, no, no. Once you are under our puppet rule, you stay under our puppet rule. More about this story after we come back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Sorry for the little bit of silence. I was delayed getting up from downstairs here. Getting old and slow. What can I tell you here? Anyway, we're talking about Saudi Arabia. We're talking about Yemen. And there is a movement in the Congress to pass a bill to basically stop U.S. support for Saudi Arabia in Yemen, because it is making the U.S. look worse than it already does to the rest of the world here. And the House has already passed the resolution, and the Senate is about to take it up. The Trump administration is apparently lobbying against the Yemen War Powers resolution in the hopes of flipping some of the Republicans who backed the measure. But fortunately, in this case, only a simple majority is needed for a procedural vote and subsequent final passage. Now, there's talk that Trump may try to veto it, and if the Congress cannot come up with the 2/3 majority it needs to override the veto, then Trump will have his war in Yemen. And he is turning out to be a war president. Look at Venezuela. But what a disappointment. What a disappointment. Now, despite the war crimes concerns in Yemen, Raytheon has nabbed a $1.6 billion arms deal with the United Arab Emirates. And apparently Amnesty International investigated the UAE and implicated the Gulf nation in war crimes for transferring Western weapons to unaccountable militia groups, thereby deepening the humanitarian crisis and fueling carnage in Yemen. And Amnesty International came out and said Emirati forces received billions of dollars worth of arms from Western states and others, only to siphon them off to militias in Yemen that answer to no one and are known to be committing war crimes. What a mess we've made of that. Over in Israel, Israeli military police yesterday raided the Al-Aqsa Mosque yet again, attacked students, evicted them from the area, and then closed the Al-Rama Gate, which leads to the holy site. At the same time, they arrested 5 Palestinian worshippers, including a woman named Nazmia Bikirat. Witnesses said the occupation police reopened the gate after several attempts by angry Palestinian worshippers into the area through the door. And according to witnesses, hundreds of Palestinian worshippers performed their prayers in front of the closed gate in an attempt to put pressure on the Israeli occupation to open it. Now, why Israel closed it in the first place is not being revealed. And of course, that entire site is nominally under the control of Jordan. Now, the Palestinians are saying that Israel is playing with fire by closing the Temple Mount gate. So, the Palestinian Authority also accused Israel of waging war on Islam and called on the intervention of the international community. Good luck with that one here. But Netanyahu is basically, he's fanning the flames of potential violence. He's struggling in the polls against Gantz, And right now, having a little civil unrest that he could put down violently would probably boost him in the polls over there. Jordan has issued a protest note with Israel's foreign ministry over the provocative Israeli actions against the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And Jordan called for Israel to stop its violations of Al-Aqsa's sanctity immediately. That's not going to happen either. I mean, Israel wants that entire Temple Mount back to itself. They want Al-Aqsa gone. They want the Dome of the Rock gone. They want to build their, what would it be, the fourth or fifth temple there? And the historical irony is that the real site of the first temple is actually about 250 yards to the southeast of the Temple Mount. And this is from Israeli archaeologists who are saying this. What everybody thinks is the Temple Mount is the remains of a Roman fort. Just how silly it all gets here. Interesting little article. There is the possibility of a Palestine-Jordan confederation, which would basically bring them together as an alternative to the two-state solution. Apparently, Israel is saying, well, that might not be a bad idea, because what it would mean was that what is now Palestine, what is left of Palestine, would become part of Jordan and not its own separate state, but at least they would not be under the control of Israel anymore. It's a creative solution, and I wish them a lot of luck. People are still reacting to Israel's freezing of millions of dollars in Palestinian tax revenue, which was going to make things worse in Gaza, and it's being described as collective punishment, which, as you know, is a war crime. Israel's planning to withhold $138 million in taxes it collects as a form of sanctions over stipends to political prisoners. We'll be right back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to go to the phones here. Mark in North Carolina. Aloha, Mark. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
How you doing, Mike? Mike, I'm looking with Trump. Not only is this an appointment, the man's turning out to be a total disaster. He either doesn't know what he's doing, or he maybe have lied to us from the get-go. I just saw something today. Well, actually, I saw it first on YouTube by Lee Stranahan, and he was talking about this on their fault line show today with Stranahan and Nixon. Evidently, what's happened with Trump is Kushner, his son-in-law.
Yeah,
is involved with any oil with a whole lot. There's a whole lot of tie-in. It's being investigated now. There's a whole tie-in with Genie Oil, which comes out basically oil in the Golan Heights, which belongs to Syria. Evidently, Israel Netanyahu gave the contract for it, and this seems to be a lot behind a lot of what's going on in Syria. Now, I can't believe Trump would know this if this is the case. So this, to me, shows that Trump is probably lied to us from the get-go. He said we're no more nation building, no more regime change or anything like that, and he lied to us. He saw it again yesterday with his speech in Florida about Venezuela. This guy's no good. I hate to say it. I voted for him. I went all out for him. I even contributed to his campaign. I talked to people. I tried to get other people to go along with it. I shared a lot of articles and they shared a lot of stuff on social media. And look what he's doing. He outright lied to us. So
I agree. I agree. And the word we're getting is that this idea of going into Venezuela, Trump was all for it. That he was talking about it apparently last August.
I know. I remember he was mentioning stuff like that. That the military option is, he considers available. Look, I don't know that much about Maduro, but the more I'm learning, he actually seems to be a Venezuelan patriot.
Yes.
Because he's a socialist. What does that mean? Gaddafi was a socialist also, and they were doing very well under Gaddafi in Libya. A lot of people are socialists. A lot of governments are socialist. Most of Europe used to be at least socialist. before they destroyed themselves by letting all these so-called refugees in, and got involved in foreign wars that caused a lot of the refugee problem on top of it, like Libya and Syria.
Yes.
So I mean, this is what's happening. Imagine if we get bogged down in Venezuela. I don't know. You got to wonder too, how stupid can the man be? If we get involved in any other kind of war now, any chance he has of being reelected will go down in flames. On top of that, he is an egomaniac, and he's going to consider, instead of one of the better presidents, he's going to be considered one of the worst presidents, maybe the worst. Period. So I don't know if he's taking any of this stuff to thought. I don't know who's advising him. Well, I know who's advising him. He's got these clowns, these neocons, and he's got his son-in-law advising him, and they're advising him into destruction. That's all they're doing. And I just don't know what to do, Mike. As far as Ukraine goes, you were talking about Ukraine before. I think Putin made a big mistake a couple of years ago when he put a restraining arm twice on the Next People's Republic that had the Lugansk, whatever it is. They had the Ukrainian army on the run. They probably could have gone right into Kiev. They probably could still do it if they wanted to, because the Ukrainian army has no morale. They would fold in 2 minutes.
Yeah, they have no taste for firing on their fellow countrymen. Well, I don't know. Let me take that back. I mean, if you go back to our own Civil War, of course, back then people were a lot more isolated. They didn't travel around as much. But the idea of Americans shooting at Americans, they managed to get that one over.
Yeah, well, sure, but at that time, they had to also be, in order to get Lincoln to get the Union Army to really fight, he had to make it clear you're fighting against slavery. What are the Ukrainians fighting? They know they got a corrupt government. They know there's a bunch of Nazis in a lot of respects that are running their militias, if not their whole military. I really don't see what they're fighting for. And the people of Lugansk, they, like I said, they kicked their butts before. There's no reason to believe they wouldn't kick their butts again. I think Putin sometimes, I think bends backwards, try to convince people, oh, I'm a great guy, I'm this and that. And he's kind of like a lion tamer when you look at what he's doing now in the Middle East, where he's got Turkey, Israel, Saudi Arabia, Iran, all he's trying to do a balancing act with them. I don't know. I respect the guy. I understand I think he really does want peace. I wish we would have him as our president, but he may be biting off more than he can chew. What do you think?
Well, you're right about biting off more than he can chew, but then what he's trying to chew is being shoveled at him by the United States of America. And I've seen that sentiment before where a lot of countries are saying, gee, we wish we had this guy running things here. They're even saying that down in Haiti during all those protests. We'd rather have Putin here than this U.S. puppet. And maybe that's why the U.S. is sending in these mercenaries and these weapons. How dare you admire Putin over Trump? Boom, boom, boom. But as far as Trump himself is concerned, I worked very hard in 2016. Not so much to get Trump in as to keep Hillary out, but same difference. And I'm very disappointed in him. And I'm trying to really determine if it really is just a case of Trump just lying to us that much and going along, or of the deep state simply being able to engulf and absorb Trump once he came into the Oval Office.
By the way, I hope people understand something about Bernie Schwartz. I mean, not Schwartz, Sanders.
Sanders.
Yeah, I know. I'm thinking of Tony Curtis. That was the real name.
Yes.
But, Sanders is a fraud, too. I saw something, I heard about this before by this guy, Ryan Dawson.
Yes.
Also a YouTuber. And I don't know if you heard of him or not, but...
oh, yeah.
Anyway.
We're very good friends. He's actually guest hosted this show.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that. Why didn't you have him on? I'd love to hear him on your show. Great.
He calls in on a regular basis.
Okay, anyway, he said that he did say he called taking Bernie to the woodshed, and he pointed out that Bernie is at least somewhat of a Zionist. He refused to really criticize Israel the way he should, especially when with the Palestinians. He played videos, and also he's also against Russia. He blames Russia for the what do you call it, Crimea. He also calls Assad a criminal and said Assad's responsible for 400,000 deaths. And talking about Lincoln, our Civil War, we could say that Lincoln was responsible for 700,000 deaths in the Civil War here. Okay, but like Assad, he was trying to hold his country together, and Assad is trying to hold his country together. I mean, it makes no sense. So I wouldn't try. The only one I like right now of all any of the two parties right now running, or looks like they're going to be running, is Tulsi Gabbard. If Rand Paul primaried Trump, that would be a great thing. Or for that matter, if Rand Paul and Tulsi got united in a third party, kind of like the Italian Populist Party, which took the right and the left, united them, and said we'll take care of everything else once we get our country back in its feet. That would be nice too, but I don't know if it's possible. I don't know what you think.
Well, again, I think we're going to have to go through literally a crash here and have to just rebuild it from the ground up. I think our current economic and political system is irretrievably corrupted. It's totally self-serving. It is going to expend all of its considerable wealth and power to preserve the current status quo. They're not going to let anybody change anything because it works for them. May not work for you, but it works for them. Anyway, Mark, I got to let you go. I'm falling way behind on my talking points, and I got to get to a lot of things. So thank you for the phone call. We're going to let you go. In fact, we're going to close the lines here for a little bit because I really do need to get some of this news done. We're coming up here on hour number 3. Okay, the Al-Mazan Center for Human Rights is concerned about Israel's decision to deduct salaries of Palestinians killed, wounded, and arrested by Israeli occupation forces from tax revenues collected on behalf of the Palestinian Authority. And so they're basically calling for an international effort to basically tell Israel, you shouldn't be doing this. You're just increasing the pain on the people of Gaza. And of course, what Israel's going to say, of course, that's what we're doing, and you all mind your own business. We are above the law. Now, Poland, their prime minister, has canceled plans for his country to send a delegation for a meeting in Jerusalem after the acting Israeli foreign minister said that the Poles, quote, collaborated with the Nazis, end quote, and, quote, sucked anti-Semitism with their mother's milk, end quote. I thought foreign ministers were to be a little bit more diplomatic than that. Now, the fact of the matter is the Poles did not, in fact, cooperate with the Nazis. In fact, the Poles suffered at the hands of the Nazis quite a bit. But the Polish pullout triggered the collapse of the entire summit, which was going to be known as the Visegrad Group. And it's some reckless behavior. When you're trying to get together with somebody and do some business, you don't insult them just before it's going to happen. And we've even seen that with the Trump administration, that at the same time we're talking trade talks with China, that we're pushing on them on Taiwan, we're pushing on them in the South China Sea here. Interestingly enough, up in Canada, somebody did a poll of Jewish Canadians and found they're actually very divided in their opinions on Israel. Many are highly critical of it. And a majority of Jewish Canadians do not think that criticism of Israel is anti-Semitic. Of course it isn't. That's like saying the only reason people complain about the Nazis is they hate the German people here. So, now remember Jamal Khashoggi, journalist, possible intelligence asset, was murdered in the Saudi consulate in Istanbul last October. And apparently his last article he was working on, which was incomplete, has been released. It was an unfinished opinion, calling for unity between the Saudi and the Iranian people, asking for both countries to be the voices of reason and moderation. Okay. Now, a former North Korean diplomat, and I emphasize this guy has defected to South Korea, so he may be bribed or coerced on this, but he's basically saying that Kim Jong-un has no intention of giving up his nuclear weapons and sees his upcoming second summit with U.S. President Donald Trump as a chance to cement his country's status as a nuclear weapons state. Well, he's already kind of done that. So Thae Yong-ho, who defected to South Korea in 2016, said in a news conference that next week's meeting in Vietnam will be a failure if Trump can't get Kim to declare he will abandon all of his nuclear facilities and weapons and return North Korea to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Agreement. Well, it's not a requirement of the Non-Proliferation Agreement to not have nuclear weapons. I mean, the United States has signed and ratified the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Agreement, and look at the arsenal they have. So Thae worked as a minister in the North Korean embassy in London before fleeing to South Korea. He is the highest level North Korean diplomat to defect to the South. Now, the reality here is, especially given the proven belligerence of the United States and the West, Kim Jong-un, in my opinion, would be an idiot to give up his nukes. That is the only thing preventing an eventual U.S. invasion. That's the reason to have nuclear weapons, as a deterrent. They're not first strike attack weapons. You don't go off to a country and say, we're going to invade you, and you start by nuking them. There's going to be nothing left for you to invade. You hold those nuclear weapons in reserve and you sit on them, and the message is you do not invade us or something bad is going to happen to you. That's the reason to have these weapons. And every time a country gives up its weapons of deterrence, they get invaded. Now, Iraq never had nuclear weapons. They did have chemical weapons. They were convinced to give them up with a promise of security, and then they got invaded. Syria gave up their chemical weapons with a promise to not be invaded. Then they got invaded. See how the pattern is working? So Kim Jong-un, I know he's smart enough to be seeing this. Over in Iran, Iran agreed to the P5+1. They curtailed their nuclear activity. They're still playing by the rules according to the Aiea. What does the United States do? Pull out of the agreement and start throwing sanctions at them, getting ready to invade. Fool me once. Alrighty. Apparently, there is a big scandal over in Justin Trudeau's government. A top aide has resigned over these corruption allegations. And apparently it involves reports it pressured the former Attorney General into dropping years-old corruption charges against Montreal-based SNC Lavalin, a Canadian construction company with close ties to Trudeau's party. All righty. Now, everyone's been talking about the $22 trillion that has gone missing. Well, no, I'm sorry, the $22 trillion national debt that we just crossed over into. Close behind it is the $21 trillion that has gone missing from the Department of Defense and the housing and urban development budgets from 1998 to 2015. 21 trillion. So you put that together, and what is that? That's $43 trillion that just nobody knows where it went. It just completely vanished. Let's think about that while you're filling out that old 1040 form, rather. As we mentioned before, Bernie Sanders has stepped into the presidential race for 2020, and he's going to be a socialist. I think he's going to do very well, considering how well he did last time. And I'm sure that all the Democratic strategists are already recalculating how this is going to impact different candidates' possibilities. All right, we got to take another break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And as we mentioned before the commercial break, Bernie Sanders has stepped into the 2020 race, and he's basically out there saying we are running against a president who's a pathological liar, a fraud, a racist, a sexist, a xenophobe, and someone who is undermining American democracy as he leads us in an authoritarian direction. Sanders called for 1 million Americans to help him turn Trump into a one-term president. I don't think he needs to worry about that. Trump is turning Trump into a one-term president. Okay. Now, Trump is finally starting to show high dudgeon over the situation with McCabe and Rosenstein and the Department of Justice trying to put together a plot to oust Donald Trump using the 25th Amendment. And he describes it as illegal and treasonous, and he's right on both counts. And you need to understand how the 25th Amendment works. The 25th Amendment provides that if a majority of the cabinet and the vice president sign off on a letter that the president is unfit to serve, the president is removed from office temporarily. The president has the option of being able to prove that he is fit to return to office and he can come on back. There is no provision in the 25th Amendment that involves the Department of Justice or any other law enforcement body. That would be on the impeachment side. But it's important to remember, I mean, McCabe's admissions on 60 Minutes prove the coup is still going on. These people inside the government in high positions, well-paid positions, I might add, are trying to eject a duly elected president. And I don't care how disappointed I am in Donald Trump. He is the elected president. And until he actually is physically or mentally incapable of carrying out his job, the 25th Amendment does not apply. And until he has actually committed a high crime or misdemeanor, he should not be impeached. The 25th Amendment and impeachment should not be used to settle political differences, and that's exactly what they're being used for right now. All right, McCabe appeared yesterday on NPR's Morning Edition to discuss his firing from the Bureau and the investigation into leaking information to the Wall Street Journal, and he was asked about lying under oath, which he declined to answer, saying that there's ongoing legal issues that he is handling here. Now, one of the things that McCabe said on the 60 Minutes interview is he tried to puff up Lisa Page and Peter Strzok, saying, these are good people who serve this country well. They're really good people. They made a few bad decisions, but hey, who among us really hasn't? But they're good people. So I'm not sure what's going on there. We'll be back after station identification. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. The phone lines are closed. We may open them a little bit later in the show, but I've got a lot of stuff to get through here. And as we were talking about before the station identification, McCabe, in his 60 Minutes interview, was puffing up Peter Strzok and Lisa Page, saying they're good people, they've served the country well. I'm not sure I agree with that, but he's basically trying to say, you know, that they're good people who've just made a few bad choices. We don't really know because there's never really been a full investigation. Things are a little different when he talks about Rod Rosenstein. And apparently, basically, McCabe's subtext for the 60 Minutes interview was there was a deep state coup attempt against President Trump, but Rosenstein did it. It was all his fault. Now, in the absence of any smoking gun against President Trump from Mueller's investigation, that suggests Trump's deep state opponents are starting to turn on each other, and that would be a wonderful thing to see. And as a matter of fact, Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein is expected to step down by mid-March. And an official announcement of who's been selected to replace him could come as early this week. All right. Now, let's talk about Jussie Smollett. Apparently, the grand jury is meeting right now to decide what he's going to be charged with, if it's going to be simple fraud or something else, or if, as that caller said, should he be charged with a hate crime, even though directed against himself. And as I mentioned before, the irony of this is the first story that we heard when the story was revealed as a hoax is that Smollett wanted to attract some attention to himself. He wanted some publicity because he feared being written off the show Empire. And a week before the actual attack, he faked a racist letter sent to the show's studio. And apparently it didn't get the reaction he expected. So he arranged for this attack, and he had these two Nigerian brothers, bodybuilders, paid them $3,500 to go along with this. So it's nice to see somebody finally put the scam on the Nigerians. But the Osundaro brothers issued a joint statement saying, "We are not racist, we are not homophobic, we are not anti-Trump. We were born and raised in Chicago and are American citizens." It's interesting where everybody's talking about, race, because everybody involved was black. It's amazing. What's really interesting, though, is the reaction of the media and all those politicians who just leapt on board this story right at the get-go because it fit their agenda, and they just charged with it. Now, yesterday, CNN's Brian Stelter said there was a rush to judgment in the case of Jussie Smollett's alleged hate crime, but it did not come from the media outlets. Oh, no. CNN is blameless. It was mostly the celebrity press and activists and Twitter. And I think it was really careful reporting by news organizations, but it all gets lumped in together at the end of the day. So that's the latest spin. It wasn't the corporate media that turned this into a major story. It was those Twitter people over there. And, of course, he's been criticized for those remarks. ABC is trying to defend Robin Roberts' softball interview of Smollett on Good Morning America. And it was a softball interview. It didn't ask any challenging questions whatsoever. ABC's excuse now is that the decision to softball the interview was based on the knowledge they had at the time that he was this victim of this horrible crime. Now, Kamala Harris is one of the politicians who basically went ballistic, talking about lynchings. And now that the story has collapsed, on her first campaign visit to New Hampshire, she was asked about it, and apparently she was at a total loss for words, didn't know what to say, just flopping around, if you will. So why does the media keep falling for obvious hoaxes? Well, first of all, because a successful hoax is going to present what the victim expects to see. And that's what Smollett engineered. The second reason has to do with the nature of corporate media itself. And there's a little slogan that goes around the newsrooms: if it bleeds, it leads. If it thinks, it stinks. And I remember there was a rock song that was out some time ago called "Give Me Dirty Laundry" that kind of gets right to the heart of that as well. This is the stuff they know will leap out of a headline and stimulate newspaper sales. And that's why they gleefully seized on that situation. Speaking of gleefully seized, the new spin now coming in from the liberals is how conservatives are seizing on the embarrassment of the Smollett story to try and do harm to the corporate media and the legitimate liberal concern with racism. Okay, we're going to do a shout out to our honor affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. So everyone's talking about the narrative. I mean, the liberals are still out there saying, boy, I'm pretty sure the attack really happened and it's being covered up. And this narrative was cut and dried to people who were looking at the case through lenses clouded by their anti-Trump bias. And that's exactly what it was. The hoax fit right in with what people wanted to see, and they fell for it. But we're getting to a degree of violence that is getting dangerous. We had that man who literally pulled a gun, a .40 caliber Glock, on a Sam's Club customer wearing a Make America Great hat. It's just a hat. So what we're seeing is the complete exposure of the corporate media's complete lack of critical thinking skills in covering the Jussie Smollett fairy tale. And the corporate media has fallen for hundreds of hate crimes hoaxes over the years. They just walk into them one right after the other, after the other, after the other. And it may be because journalism today is taught very differently than it was back when I was a kid. And I can say that safely because when I was in college, as one of my non-major electives, I took a journalism class. And we were taught about, who, what, where, when, why, sometimes how, of always questioning what is in front of you, of getting confirmation, second sourcing, and all the rest of that. When I was teaching computer animation out at the University of Hawaii at Manoa, the classroom next door was part of the journalism department. And I peeked in there, and they were all basically learning how to do their own hair and makeup. So, anyway, Facebook has been preventing people, conservatives, from posting articles on this Jussie Smollett hate hoax. And Rod Dreher, author of The Benedict Option, A Strategy for Christians in a Post-Christian Nation, and Daily Caller reporter Jen Kearns saw their articles get censored on Facebook. Apparently on Facebook, you're not allowed to say that Jussie Smollett carried out a hate hoax. See, the problem for the liberals is this one's attracted a lot of attention because Jussie's a star. They can't make this go away. And this is going to have Americans thinking, how many other of these supposedly horrific, shocking things that we've been told were hoaxes as well to motivate us? Anyway, so it's time for a national emergency conversation about fake news media constantly spreading hate crime hoaxes like the phony Jussie Smollett lynching. I mean, you can see how Alice through the looking glass this all is. The corporate media is still out there trying to say, we're the true news, we're the true news. Those independent media people, they're the fake news and we have to shut them down. And yet the reality is the reverse. We're out here giving you the truth. We're giving you the facts. We're giving you the information that you need. While the corporate media is still feeding you out the propaganda here. Now, CBS's Lara Logan just did something very, very brave. She went on the Mic Drop podcast and basically came on out, and she admitted she's committing professional suicide, saying the media is mostly liberal. It was a scorched earth interview. She was very critical and said basically that 95% of the corporate media are registered Democrats, and that's just the way it is. How can you be fair, balanced, and objective when you have that much political bias there? And it is taking a toll. There were 15,000 layoffs from the corporate media last year. That's a spike of 281% from the previous year. But don't expect any apologies from the corporate media. In fact, they're in full damage control right now. Don't expect apologies from the left over this. I mean, don't hold your breath. From Cory Booker, Joe Biden, Nancy Pelosi, and Kamala Harris, or Al Sharpton, who opined that if Donald Trump remained silent on the Smollett matter, it would be sinister. The formerly successful actress Ellen Page blamed the non-existent assault on Mike Pence. Now, Nancy Pelosi has finally gotten around to deleting the tweet that she put up there following the Smollett attack. Okay. Now, there has been a lot of information or a lot of rumor going around about Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And earlier today, TMZ put up a video of Ruth Bader Ginsburg at the Washington, D.C. airport. And almost immediately, it was being claimed that it was actually a video from a year ago, which is not going to make things any clearer. And I know it sounds fantastical, but remember what happened when Spain's Francisco Franco died. They kept his death secret for a long time until it became a running joke on Saturday Night Live. Now, I can't imagine that they think they could keep this a secret all the way until 2020. But very clearly, there are very powerful interests who do not want to let Donald Trump appoint another conservative Supreme Court justice. I mean, look how hard they fought back against Kavanaugh with all these spurious accusations of sexual assault. Maybe they're not going to wait till 2020. Maybe they really are going to move to try and impeach and put Pence in, and Pence will just go along with a liberal Supreme Court justice. But there's a lot at stake. That Supreme Court really does control much of the future direction of this country. And so there was this, I'm trying to remember who put it up. Anyway, they put up two clips, one from a year ago from a video shot by TMZ and the one that TMZ put up today. And Ruth Bader Ginsburg looks identical. Same clothes, same scarf, same bodyguards. And apparently TMZ basically took a videotape of her leaving one airport to come back to Washington, D.C. to work, and then they videotaped her arriving in D.C., and apparently they just sat on that tape. At least that's the claim. At least that's the claim. But even actor James Woods is now out there saying, where is Ruth Bader Ginsburg? You know, we don't know. We need a wellness check. And no, we don't need somebody else, third party, telling us that she is okay. All right. Going to take a phone call. Joe from Nome, Alaska. Aloha, Joe. Joe, what's on your mind?
Jussie Smollett, hate crime question.
Yeah.
Whether it was a hate crime or not. Well, here's an interesting thought. What if Jussie actually did this as a false flag for the Republicans, intending for it to be leaked to smear the Democrats? Now, would that be a hate crime?
Well, first of all, Jussie Smollett is all buddy-buddy with the Democrats. He had his picture taken with Barack Obama, and in fact, his sisters actually worked for Obama. So he's in bed very deep with the Democrats. So that theory is kind of dead on arrival. You know, I think Smollett really was convinced he was going to lose his job on Empire, and he thought some PR might get his job back. But now if he's going to go to jail, he's lost his job on Empire and probably his entire career.
Well, hey, you never know. Trump might pardon him. By the way, I had to laugh when you were all aboard the Trump train back when. But I got to admit, it's better than Hillary. But on the other hand, you shouldn't have been so assiduous about stumping for him.
Well,
like
opinion. I said before, and I said it earlier in the show, it wasn't so much about working for Trump. I was working against Hillary. And as disappointing as Trump has been, I still hold the opinion that had Hillary taken the White House, we would be in a world of hurt right now, much worse than we are.
Oh, I got to say, yeah, right, but I still think both sides are controlled, totally controlled. Hello?
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for the phone call. We're going to let you go. And getting on back to the Smollett case, the latest update is apparently the grand jury could be delayed for several days because apparently the two brothers who were involved in this, Abel and Ola Osundaro, have not yet received immunity from prosecution, although they did not actually file a false police report or give false information. Law enforcement says Jussie is the only one who lied. So we don't know what the holdup is, but apparently there is a holdup down there. All right. Now, CNN came up with this report linking a bunch of web pages over at Facebook to Russia. And CNN claimed that all of the web pages linked to Mafic Media were secretly linked with the Russian government. Now, they didn't come up with anything to prove that. Mafic Media is based in Germany. It is partly owned by a Russian subsidiary. The company says it has full editorial independence. But Facebook took the pages down anyway. So, basically, they manufactured a story out of thin air. These web pages are linked to the Russian government. Nothing to back it up at all. Okay, there are 4 names that are emerging for a new United States ambassador to the United Nations, and the nominees include Dina Powell, Kelly Craft, and Richard Grenell, and John James. And let's see, Kelly Craft and Richard Grenell, they're the current ambassadors to Canada and Germany. Dina Powell's a partner at Goldman Sachs, boo hiss. John James is a former GOP Senate candidate from Michigan. So this new list came on out after spokeswoman Heather Nauert withdrew her nomination for the post over the weekend. Apparently, she got caught hiring a nanny who wasn't legally allowed to work in the United States of America. So there it is. Ann Coulter and Pat Buchanan are analyzing this bill that Trump signed. And they're saying it's the last nail in the coffin of the Trump revolution, because the bill appears to expressly forbid the building of the wall, contains a de facto amnesty, and opens the door to massive future immigration abuse through family reunion, legal immigration, and other loopholes. Nothing has been done about the H-1B visa scam, which is devastating the employment prospects of American graduates who are up to their neck in student loans. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. And at this point, pretty much everybody is in agreement that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's Green New Deal is a joke. And they look at some of the stuff that's in there, like these handouts to people who are unwilling to work, which portrays the socialist agenda. And originally, the proponents of this idea saw it as a way of reshaping policy toward climate, and that was all it was supposed to be. Pardon me. And it's considered a joke, even by members of our own party. So who's behind all of this? Where did this all come from? The Green New Deal blueprint was crafted by 3 far-left organizations and is being pushed by a coalition of well-funded professional progressive groups and known leftist agitators. Pardon me. Some of the organizations helping to promote the Green New Deal have ties to financing from billionaire George Soros. You knew he was going to show up here. And they trace their roots to radical groups like Occupy Wall Street and Black Lives Matter. So I think at one point even Margaret Thatcher said that global warming was an opportunity to bring about global socialism. Okay, now then, there has been a study on the issue of whether voter ID laws depress voter turnout. Well, the only voter turnout it's supposed to depress are people who are not supposed to vote. But apparently this study came on out and said that, in fact, voter ID laws do not depress voter turnout. The claim that voter ID laws are suppressing the vote, it has been debunked. It's been absolutely, absolutely debunked. So we need voter ID laws back in this country, Donald. Okay, Bill Blaine was over writing in Zero Hedge, talking about his recent trip to the United States, and he says it was an eye-opener, Poverty has never been so visible on the street. And what we're looking at is a phenomenon we talked about, I think, just a couple of days ago. People who live in these cities in the United States, Baltimore, Los Angeles, San Diego, San Francisco, the transition of their city from these beautiful, clean, urban places of a decade ago to today's squalor, for lack of a better word, has been slow. And people just sort of like didn't really see it happening. The real shock comes when you have left someplace like Los Angeles and you go away for a few years and then you come on back. And Claire and I went through that because we'd been away from Los Angeles for a few years before we came back for that gig I did for the History Channel. And oh my goodness, the homeless were everywhere. Trash, litter was everywhere. It was just this incredible shock. And same thing when we went to San Francisco to work on Day After Tomorrow. Now, I didn't have much of a memory of San Francisco, but Claire does. That's where she's from. And it was the same thing. Could not believe the deterioration. And so Bill Blaine is going through exactly the same thing. So it's also mentioned about Amazon's pulling out of New York. Well, again, Amazon, it's less of a pullout than a cancel, because apparently Amazon has decided not to build a second headquarter after all, which suggests that they are concerned about the coming recession cutting into their earnings here. Over in China, car sales have plunged the most in 7 years amid a global auto industry meltdown. Remember what I said about globalism? One nation's problems becomes everybody's problems. This recession, this next recession, will go around the globe. It will affect everybody. Now, over in the European Union, their banks are now in the clear over Brexit because they have basically set the means up to be able to carry on using London for 60 trillion pounds of crucial trading, even if there is no deal. So governments may come and governments may go, but the banks go on forever. There's an article that is rapidly going viral around the net. This version I have is from the National Post, and it's talking about the utterly unbelievable scale of U.S. debt. And to give you an idea of just how bad it is, this is the U.S. national debt, the government's debt. The U.S. debt is now higher than the combined market value of all the Fortune 500. Just with the money the United States spends on interest, the U.S. could run Canada or Mexico. All the gold ever mined would only pay off the debt accumulated just under President Obama. Pardon me. Debt from one Trump year could pay for another World War II. More about this when we come back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And we're talking about the true scale of the U.S. government's national debt. And 1 year of that deficit could pay for everything NASA has ever done going back to Explorer. Jeff Bezos' fortune would cover only 34 days of debt accumulation. In 1 year, the per household share of the deficit could buy a new car. And the U.S. just built history's most expensive warship, the Gerald R. Ford. It cost just 5 days' worth of deficit. That's how out of control this situation really is. And by the way, that $22 trillion national debt works out to $67,000 for every living American man, woman, and child here. Foreign investors are selling a record amount of U.S. debt. And we're coming up on a point where the Fed will have to monetize the debt, which is a very polite way of saying we're going to go into hyperinflation. It's a Ponzi scheme. Private central banks are a Ponzi scheme. They cannot be made to perpetuate forever because of that difference between the debt and the money supply. Now, a lot of Americans are a little upset because they're finding out that as they go to their tax preparers this year, not only are they not getting the refunds like they used to get in previous years, some are discovering they actually owe the IRS. And that's coming as a shock. This has put the Republican Party on the defensive because the public perception is that it was the ultra-wealthy and large corporations that got the benefit from the GOP tax plan, which, yeah, it did. Now, the IRS is out there saying, well, what you're missing is that the withholding changed and you were actually getting a little bit more money in your paychecks. And that's where the benefit from the tax plan comes from. I'm sure a lot of people are getting out their calculators to check that one here. Food prices will rise in 2019, adversely impacting those living paycheck to paycheck. It's already happening. Claire and I went to the Safeway yesterday, and we had a bad case of sticker shock. We didn't even buy all that much. Okay. It's even a bad year for the entertainment industry. Apparently, the winter 2019 revenue has hit an 8-year low, and they had the worst President's Day weekend in 15 years. Of course, a lot of what they're putting out just isn't all that entertaining anymore. Alrighty, there have been some leaked photos that are showing the extent to which the U.S. border facilities are being just overwhelmed by the inflow of migrants from Central America and other nations. And Breitbart published these and described them as reminiscent of the Obama-era border surge. And the images depict a Customs and Border Protection processing, detention, and transport facility at a U.S. port of entry in El Paso, Texas. The pictures are taken on February 17th. It is a mob that is coming on through here. Now, New York, California, and 14 other states have collectively sued Trump in the Ninth Circuit over the emergency declaration. And I'm sorry to see that it's in the Ninth Circuit because they are ultra-liberal and they've made some very bizarre decisions in the past here. And the litigation has 2 points. One is that they want to prevent Trump from shifting billions of dollars from military construction to the border without explicit congressional approval, which we already know he is never going to get. The suit is also asking the court to declare Trump's actions illegal, arguing that Trump showed a flagrant disregard of fundamental separation of power principles ingrained in the Constitution. Well, that's kind of hypocritical given how Congress is now trying to run the White House here. And finally, of course, they're screaming that Trump is violating the National Environmental Policy Act by planning to build a wall that will impact the environment without completing the necessary environmental impact studies, which of course would take years. Meanwhile, of course, U.S. taxpayers have funded border walls in Pakistan, Afghanistan, Egypt, Lebanon, and of course, Israel. So there's an interesting article that came on out of uns.org called Self-Hating Whites. And it starts out saying, white people are heading to extinction. If you say anything about it, you're labeled a white supremacist. Black lives matter, not white ones. And we see this, for example, in South Africa, where white farmers are being massacred under the slogan, land or death, by blacks who arrived in South Africa long after the forebears of the white farmers. The white people populated that part of Africa first. But the attitude of the black population is, it's ours, it's ours, it's ours. The whites stole our land. Africa is black and is reserved for blacks. And if the roles were reversed and it was whites massacring blacks, the whole media in the Western world would be shrill in its condemnation. But it's not happening. The whites in South Africa, disposable. Only Russia has offered South African white people refuge. The United States, Europe, and Canada are overflowing with non-white immigrants, but have no room for white ones. What does that tell you? We're going to take a phone call. John in Missouri, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
I have a question. I was wondering where you see gold and silver going during this hyperinflation that we have heading our way.
Oh, gold and silver. Well, assuming that they break free of the artificial restraints which they're currently under, you could expect gold and silver to do very well. Actually, what it would be was the paper currency would be in decline against the gold and silver, but the end result is the same. Gold is trading now for just about $1,000 an ounce. In a period of hyperinflation, it could go up to 2, 3, 4, and so forth. What its purchasing power might be, though, you need to take into effect, because what $1,000 buys today would require that $4,000 during the hyperinflationary period. So you have to basically calculate that in there as well. But it's a very good thing to have some metals in your portfolio: silver, gold, tantalum, platinum, just whatever you can get in small amounts, so that nobody knows that you've got it. And once you get that, don't tell people that you've got it. You become a target.
Do you think we'll ever be buying things with strictly gold and silver?
Well, there's a big problem. There's only so much gold that's been mined in all of the history of mankind. And right now, if you look at the size of the human population, for us to be using gold coins as legal tender, they would be microscopic and easily lost. Now, they might go the route, some of the things they were trying in the Middle East, where there was actually a card or a token that had a tiny fleck of gold embedded in it. That might be a way that they could go as well. Or we could go back to claim checks, gold certificates, where the gold is in the bank and the gold certificate is the claim check. The gold certificate is not the money, it is a claim for the money. That's what the original currency of this country was, the silver certificate and the gold certificate. And then because of the Federal Reserve, eventually we were brainwashed into thinking that ink and paper was the money. And it isn't, and it never was. Go back to that Constitution. Right. The lawful money of this country is gold and silver.
Thank you very much, Michael.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. And getting into this time of the show, it's time to talk about, insert ominous music, human-caused global warming. There is another major storm coming on to the North American continent, and more than 200 million Americans will see snow, rain, ice, or a mix. It started today, and it will impact roughly 60% of the U.S. population. Parts of 39 of the 48 contiguous United States will be touched by this massive storm, including every single state east of the Mississippi River. And it's going to have an impact. It's going to reach parts of 26 of the 30 most populous states. So, Puxatawny Phil blew it. Snow has blanketed Las Vegas. Now, they had some flurries about a week ago. Came on down, touched the ground, stayed a few seconds, and then melted away. This was a lot more severe, and it was actually accumulated snow, 2 inches, and it caused the I-15 to have to be shut down. So that's got a lot of people rather surprised. Just like the folks down on Maui, when that state park got accumulated snow here. The latest storm up in Milwaukee has dropped 9 inches there. More snow forecast for Wednesday. This is a bad one. This may be the worst winter storm of the season so far here. So let's get on back here to all of these global warming cultists who are out there. Right now, a staggering 30,000 scientists have come forward confirming man-made climate change is a hoax perpetuated in order to make money and exert government control over anybody dumb enough to fall for it. One of the experts is Weather Channel founder John Coleman, who warns that huge fortunes are being made by man-made climate change proponents like Al Gore. And he did. Al Gore ended the 2000 campaign race almost broke. And today he's very rich again. He bought himself a nice little house out on the beach in Southern California. So much for ocean levels rising. And at one point he was boasting he was going to be the world's first carbon billionaire. It was a scam. It is a scam. What controls climate here on Earth is solar energy and the tilt of the Earth in its orbit and the shape of the Earth's orbit. And as they move around, we get the ice ages and we get the interglacials. So, pardon me. A scientific paper published by a team of Australian researchers has revealed a startling find. Scientists at the Permanent Service for Mean Sea Level have been adjusting historical data regarding tide levels in the Indian Ocean. This is highly questionable, and the result is they're depicting rapidly rising seas. But it's not really happening. They're faking the data. Scientists have found sea levels are stable and have been for the entirety since the beginning of the 20th century. To put it simply, these PSMSL scientists have been arbitrarily changing their data to create the illusion of a problem that doesn't actually exist so that politicians can sell you a solution in exchange for taxes and obedience. Okay, down in Antarctica, there was an expedition that was sent out, this being Antarctica summer, where the ice and everything should be at its lowest, and they wanted to find Shackleton's Antarctic shipwreck, the Endurance, which was lost in the Weddell Sea. And apparently they had to turn back because the ice was too bad. In fact, the ice was so bad, they lost one of their 2 autonomous underwater vehicles that had been searching for the wreck on the seafloor. So they've announced they've abandoned the search. They're now returning north to avoid getting trapped here. Okay. See Something, Say Something, the chocolate version. Apparently there was this 11-year-old boy who likes to sell hot chocolate. And that's a good thing to do in winter. People can get warmed up. And so he does it from time to time. And he was out there selling his hot chocolate. And the cops show up. And apparently a neighbor who has taken See Something, Say Something way too far, called the cops and said, I'm worried about this child being out in the cold. Apparently unable to put on a coat and go out and check for herself. So she sicked the cops on him. Now, in this case, the story has a happy ending. The cops bought some hot chocolate from him. So that worked out well. Now, if you know anything about women's makeup, you know that they have a thing about these facial masks, which are these creams that are spread all over the face, and then they harden and they're peeled off. And apparently, there was a big stink because somebody came on out and declared that the charcoal face mask is racist because it looks like blackface. And I mean, that is just utterly ridiculous. It's black because it's charcoal. And it's not like any woman would wear this mask out in public anyway. But the liberals were all over Twitter saying it looks too much like blackface. It looks too much like blackface. We've got to do something about that. Alrighty, Monsanto's Roundup, specifically the glyphosate, raises the risk of certain cancers in heavily exposed individuals by an eye-popping 41%. This is a study done by former EPA advisors. And this is going to have a serious impact on this wave of legal actions against the company. And I'm sure that Bayer is already out there saying, it's not too late to cancel the deal. We'll let you go back to being Monsanto. But apparently exposure to glyphosate increases a person's risk of developing non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And I seem to have noticed there seems to be a lot more of that than there used to be. And it's nasty. We live in a country where corporations are allowed to sell these very dangerous chemicals, and it's okay with the government as long as taxes are being paid. Okay, here's a good one. This mom is suing a New York school district for kicking her kid out for not being vaccinated. Vaccination is against her religion, and so she's going to sue because she's not going to abandon her beliefs because some school district tells her to. We'll be right back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Last segment of our program today here. We're talking about vaccines, and one of the arguments put forward to justify all these mandatory vaccination laws being passed in all the states is that the unvaccinated children, they're posing a risk. They're a danger. They're a danger to public health. And there's this Harvard immunologist, Dr. Tatiana Obakanich, who came on out and said, that's absolute nonsense. Unvaccinated children pose zero risk to anyone, especially children who've supposedly been vaccinated. And so this argument is going on. And did you notice over on YouTube when they're setting out their standards for banning videos now, along with, conservative points of view, they have the phrase medically inaccurate. And so the push is on to protect the profits of corporate pharmaceutical by simply leaving their propaganda, their sales pitch, unchallenged. Now, the reality is, there's this article here, this from Health Impact News, 0 U.S. measles deaths in 10 years, but over 100 measles vaccine deaths reported. That's a little less than accurate. I think after the time this article was written, there was one woman in Washington State who came down with the measles immediately after getting the measles vaccine, and she died of it. But that's it. You are far more likely to die from the vaccine than from the illness itself. So what do you want to do? Well, don't think about it. The government's going to decide for you. You're going to spend your money to get vaccines pumped into you. And here's where it gets a little Twilight Zone. Having exhausted the human population as a vaccine market, because with everybody being ordered to get vaccines, they can't increase sales on that. Now the push is pet vaccines. Pet vaccines. Oh, yes, you got to get a vaccine for your pets here. And as pet vaccination rates rise, pets are starting to develop autism symptoms. You just think about that one. What do you do with an autistic rabbit? Anyway, another story. This is from Natural News. Apparently, vaccinated children face a 3,000% increased risks of dangerous allergies. And they're talking about things like eczema, allergic rhinitis. And, I see all these commercials for psoriasis, and I'm wondering, is that a vaccine injury that hasn't been documented yet? Is the medical industrial complex guaranteeing its profits by first making us sick and then making us sort of kind of maybe well, as long as you keep the ongoing treatments? Now, $4 billion has already been paid out with the vaccine injury court, and the government says that only 1% of all vaccine injuries are reported to the court. So you think about that, how much damage is out there. All right, there's the music. Time for me to get out of here and get something useful done with the rest of the day. Please stay tuned for John Stedmiller. I'm sure he's got lots of interesting things to share with you. Take what you learn here, share it with everybody that you know. Talk to them, send the paper email or paper mail or email. Don't use social media. They are clamping down so hard on that. Please donate to Republic Broadcasting. Please donate to whatreallyhappened.com. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.